What is going on, everyone? This is Sirs TCG here, making my YouTube debut on the channel, coming at you with the deck profile that I took to locals this past Tuesday, and I was playing Kashtira. I went 5-0, didn't drop a single round, and I hadn't really played Kashtira since the Ariseheart ban. It used to be my favorite deck in the format, just my favorite deck in general, aside from Tearlament, and I had a lot of fun playing it. I didn't think it was that good coming into this format, but I was pleasantly surprised with what it could do. I would highly recommend playing this deck in the current format. It's a lot of fun and it's really powerful, especially when it can run D-Shifter. Big shoutouts to Player Cards and Collectibles in London and to my buddy Yugi Wo. Go check out his channel at Yugi Wo on YouTube. Now let's get started with the deck profile. Starting off with the monsters, we're playing 3 copies of Kashtira Unicorn. This is the main combo starter of the deck. It gives you access to Kashtira Theosis and Kashtira Birth, which are 2 of the craziest spells in the deck. It's an oppressive monster that rips card from your opponent's extra deck, and it's a beefy 2500 attack, 2100 defense. In a simplified game state where you can special this, it's good to have. You want to max out on consistency. Next up, we're playing triple copies of the best card in the deck, Kashtira Fenrir. This card itself is so oppressive, it can banish any face-up card face down when your opponent activates a monster effect, or on attack declaration. It searches your other Kashtira monsters so you can combo off with your Ariseheart or your Scareclaw Kashtira, and it's really good again in a simplified game state where you need to just special it, and it already has a board presence on its own. This is another one of those cards that you want to see in your starting hand. Next up, we're running triple copies of Kashtira Ariseheart. Some people opt to play 2, I like to play 3 for the consistency, plus it's a really good extender to see in your hand. The Banish 3 effect that this card has is really disruptive for your opponent, plus the capability to turn itself into a level 7 for your Exceed plays is great. We're also playing 1 copy of Scareclaw Kashtira and 1 copy of Kashtira Ogre. Scareclaw Kashtira really helps you out problem monsters, such as Skull Guardian of the Voiceless Voice. In my matchup against Voiceless Voice, when I went to summon Scareclaw Kashtira, my opponent knew that he had to negate it or else I was going to out his whole board with it, since Scareclaw Kashtira can negate the effects of any monster that it or any other Kashtira monster battles with. Additionally, the effect that lets it attack in defense position makes it a good Theosis target when you want to OTK. You just have to remember that you can't Theosis Fenrir specifically to get into Scare Cash because it needs to be a different attribute. Kashtira Ogre is another one of those big body monsters that searches you preparations, the trap card of the deck. Since it's got a beefy 2800 attack originally, it makes it a really good candidate to help you OTK your opponent. On attack declaration, it can look at the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck and rip one face down. Having that deck knowledge, knowing what your opponent's going to draw, is crucial. Next up, we're playing 4 copies of Pressure Planet Raidsoth, well, 3 copies of Pressure Planet Raidsoth and 1 Terraforming. The field spell is really good to get you into all your Kashtira monsters, depending on the situation. You can search Unicorn, Fenrir, Scareclaw Kashtira, Ariseheart, Ogre, whatever you want. The secondary effect of it is that you gain 100 attack and defense for each different attribute on the field. That doesn't just include Kashtira monsters. Pairing this alongside a Shangri-Ara is another form of interruption. Typically what you do is you have a Unicorn on the field and you have a Shangri-Ara on the field. What you want to do is you want to hold your Unicorn effect until there's a problem card on the field. Then when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can trigger the Kashtira Unicorn to banish one from the extra deck face down. Then you can trigger the Shangri-Ara to block one of your opponent's zones. That will trigger Pressure Planet Raidsoth in order to pop a card on your opponent's field. So it's really good for your OTKs, it's really good as a form of interruption, and it's good to beef up your already big bodies. And since you're playing a decent amount of non-engine in the deck, you obviously want to max out on the consistency of these cards to make sure that you can start your combos. Next up, we're throwing up 3 copies of Kashtira Theosis and 3 copies of Kashtira Birth. These are the best spell cards in the deck, searchable cards with Kashtira Unicorn. Theosis lets you summon another Kashtira monster from the deck. Birth lets you summon a Kashtira monster from your graveyard or your banished, and you're also able to normal summon a level 7 monster from your hand as well, which comes up a lot. It also has an absolutely busted effect, where if your opponent activates a spell card, you can target 3 cards in their graveyard and banish them face down. The next spell cards we're going to be playing are 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity for the consistency and 1 copy of Called by the Grave. Like I mentioned, Pot of Prosperity is there for consistency's sake, opening up your 1-card starters like your field spells and your unicorns and your Fenrirs. And the Called by the Grave is obviously there for hand traps. If you don't open Shifter and they try to Joel you, it's there to counter that. You could use it as interruption on your opponent's turn as well. Since we're activating a lot of effects in the graveyard this format, it's a good one to have to round out your deck. Moving on to our hand trap lineup, it wouldn't be a Kashtira deck without Dimension Shifter. This card can end turns depending on the matchup, and the Kashtira cards really don't mind being banished, so it's almost a must-have to have here. Next up, we're playing 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Springs. It's a really good hand trap right now. It can stop a lot of things. It's very generic. Most, if not all, decks are playing 3 of this in the main right now, some even in the side. You all know what this does. It hits Branded Fusion, it hits the Snake Eyes Monsters effect to summon, it hits the original Sinful Spoils. Great card to have. And in this particular build, we're pairing it with a couple other of the Ghost Girls, just so that we can have that Baronne de Fleur access as well. So we're going to be pairing that with 3 copies of Ghost Belle and Haunted Mansion. It's a really good card this format. It hits Labyrinth, and there's a lot of Labyrinth duelists at our locals. It can hit Snake Eyes, because it can hit the Flamebridge Dragon. It's just overall a really powerful card to have in the main deck this format. We're playing double copies of Ghost Ogre. I know that this kind of conflicts with Dimensional Shifter, because it's the only Ghost Girl that has to be sent to the graveyard. However, since we're playing Baronne de Fleur, we're only playing 2 copies of this. It really goes hard into this format because there's a lot of field spells, there's a lot of Link monsters that activate on the field. It's pretty good situationally, and it hits a lot of cards that just aren't expecting to see this. It's really good into Fire King Island, it's really good into any of the Link 2s, Link 3s that your opponent's making on their turn. And like I said before, we're making Baronne de Fleur sometimes in that simplified game state where you can special summon one of your level 7 Kashtira monsters, and if you're not using Ghost Ogre, you can just normal summon it, make that Baronne. You can recur that Kashtira monster that you use as a synchro material with Kashtira Birth or Kashtira Preparations, depending on if that Kashtira monster is banished, and kind of just go from there. There's also a lot of continuous spells and traps face up in your opponent's spell trap zone, so it can be good into those as well. The next hand trap we're playing is the best hand trap in the game. It's Infinite Impermanence. This is so good for a targeted negate. It doesn't turn on Triple Tactics Talent or Triple Tactics Thrust, so you always want to use this first if it's in your hand and you have other monster hand traps to go alongside that. And we're also playing Thrust in the side deck, which you'll see a little bit later on in this video, but if it comes to it, you can always Thrust to set Imperm face down for an extra form of interruption on your opponent's turn. So with this lineup, we're running 15 non-engine, 14 of those being hand traps. The last card in the deck is Kashtira Preparations. I usually sided this out going second, but I kept the Ogre in just for the body. Kashtira Preparations, as mentioned before, is a really good card. It acts as a form of interruption to rip one from your opponent's hand, and as we know, hand knowledge is just really good in the game right now. It also acts as an extender, because it can special summon any of your Kashtira monsters from your hand or your banished pile. Obviously that gives some synergy with Dimension Shifter, Scareclaw Kashtira, banishing things from your graveyard to be reborned off Preparations. It also acts as another form of an OTK if you're swinging in with the monsters on board and can prep another monster to swing again in the battle phase. I really do think Preparations is good because if you're making a Kashtira board that has Fenrir, Unicorn, maybe a Shangri, and Birth already with prep, your opponent's not really going to prioritize the preparation interruption. They're going to prioritize Birth, Fenrir, and Unicorn first. So having that extra form of interruption with Preparations can be a really annoying form of interruption for your opponent. And since the card can trigger when your opponent activates a trap card or a trap card effect, you can rip one from their hand. Now we know a lot of people are playing Infinite Impermanence. There's a lot of face-up continuous trap cards in the game right now with Voiceless Voice and Yubel Unchained coming out in the woodwork. Just having that extra little bit of interruption to add on top of all your big bodies and your other spells is just absolutely insane. We're going to be moving on to the extra deck here, and we're going to include 2 copies of Link Spider, 1 copy of G Golem Crystal Heart, and then the 1 copy of Decode Talker Heat Soul. I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't go into this engine one time this week. I didn't really go into my extra deck much at all, but it's really good to have when you make Dracosack, make 2 tokens, and do the whole Decode Talker Heat Soul line just to draw some cards in order to interrupt your opponent on their turn so that you can come back to your turn. You could sub this out for a super polymerization package, and then you could add your Garura, your Predaplant Dragostapelia, and your Mud Dragon, whatever the case may be, to go for some more disruption. Next up, we're going to be playing a couple Link 2s here, IP Masquerena being one, and SP Little Knight being the other. SP Little Knight has some synergy with Kashtira, where if your opponent activates a monster effect, you can banish cards from your field in order to special summon your own Kashtira monsters. Plus, it's a really good form of interruption in general on your turn and your opponent's turn. We all love broken Link 2s. Rounding out the Link monsters, we're going to be playing 1 copy of Appaloosa Both Goddess and 1 Access Code Talker. Appaloosa is just there to have. You don't really go into it much. If you're Link climbing with the Crystal Heart, Link Spider combination, you can go into it. Access Code just kind of helps you with some more OTK potential. The Kashtira monsters alone already kind of have a decent OTK option. So if you need a couple more pops or a little extra damage there with Access Code Talker as you're Link climbing from your Link Spiders and your Crystal Hearts and your SPIPs and whatnot, you have the option for that. We're going to start with the Exceed monsters, and we're going to include one copy of Kashtira Shangri-Ira. This is probably the thing that I went to the most on Tuesday, just to get extra cash bodies on the board. It pairs really well with the field spell in order to get poppin'. It can linger on the field with its protection effect, and you could even use it to make Zeus, because it has protection from battle by detaching a material from it. It also helps get any of your other Kashtira monsters online from the deck to give you some of those missing pieces. The next one we're playing is Mecha Fanabeast Dracosac. This is how you get into your Link Spider, G-Golem, Crystal Heart, Deco Talker, Heat Soul line. You make 2 tokens, then you make 2 Link Spiders, then you make Crystal Heart, revive one of the Link Spiders, then make Deco Talker, Heat Soul to keep drawing into hand traps, drawing into engine, whatever the case may be. It's also really good to swing in to go into Zeus as well, because it has protection with tokens. The next one we're playing is Dark Arm Dragon of Annihilation, probably the best Exceed in the deck. Pop 2, clear your graveyard. It's a good form of removal, and you could banish cards from your graveyard to either open up your graveyard for another shifter play, or you could banish your Theosis to add back Kashtira cards from your banish pile. The next one we're playing is number 11 Big Eye. It can help you out some problem monsters. For example, if you're in the Flu matchup and you're dealing with an M-Pen, you can special summon your Kashtira monsters in defense, then special Big Eye in defense to take the big penguin, and then kind of just go from there. It also helps if your opponent's playing any cash monsters like Fenrir, then you can just suck it up and use it for your own advantage. The next card we're playing is Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon, a great card in time. Also a great card if you're using the OTK line and you don't have the field spell and you deal about 7,500 damage. It puts your opponent on 500 life points, and if they activate any cards, they're just self-OTKing themselves. An Exceed deck wouldn't be made if it didn't have Zeus in it. Since you're playing so many Exceeds, Zeus is such a good option. You could probably get away with playing 2. Last card in the extra deck is going to be Baron de Fleur. Since we're playing all the Ghost Girls and a bunch of level 7s, Baron is such a good card to have in the simplified game state, or if you're trying to insulate around cards like Nibiru, any kind of hand traps, and you have Birth, and you can summon back your Kashtira monsters from the Banish Zone or from the graveyard. It's just a great generic extra deck monster, great negate to have in the deck that doesn't really have any negates. You could also use it on your turn, and then if you waste the negate, you can tag it out on your opponent's standby phase to summon back one of your Kashtira monsters to your side of the field and recycle your Baron so you can go into it next turn if you wanted to. Between Shangri-Ira and Baron de Fleur, those were the 2 main monsters that I summoned from the extra deck on Tuesday at Locals. You don't really need too much of the extra deck when you're playing Kashtira at this point without Ariseheart, because all of the Kashtira monsters do everything you want them to do. The extra deck just gives you that extra utility if you need something specifically for a matchup. We're going to move on to the side deck here, and I'm including 3 copies of Lava Golem. Now this card is absolutely insane, especially in a deck where you don't really care about using your normal summon unless you're normal summoning Ariseheart. Lava Golem got me out of so many situations, just being able to take away some problem monsters on my opponent's side of the field, and then just comboing off with my Kashtira monsters, banishing my own Lava Golem with Fenrir to attack for game, with all my other Kashtira monsters complementing it. One of the only things that you have to worry about when you're running Lava Golem is if you're playing against a fire deck and you pass it back to their turn, apart from it being a good card in time because your opponent takes 1,000 in the standby, you don't want to give your opponent free fire link material as well. Next up on the list, we have 2 copies of Lightning Storm and 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster. Great generic removal cards. We're able to play these because we're playing 2 copies of Thrust and 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talents so that we can thrust into them or draw into them. And we're playing 1 copy of Evenly Matched to round out the thrust targets. These cards all did so much work. They're all great board breakers. They're a lot of fun to play, to be honest. And in a hand trap meta, these cards kind of just eat and help you OTK with your big body cash monsters. The Triple Tactics cards are just really good right now into the meta because we're in such a hand trap dependent format. That's the reason why I ran 3 in the side of the talents and 2 thrusts. I actually wanted to only run talents and then run 2 copies of Dark Hole, because Dark Hole is a really good card to have in the side with Kashtira because you don't want any monsters on the field when you want a special summon. I just couldn't find any of my copies of Dark Hole, or else I'd throw in 2, maybe 3 copies here. But this specific lineup of board breakers ended up working out really well. Evenly did a lot of work thrusting into it. Triple Tactics Talent to take or to rip my opponent's hand or to draw into more engine or hand traps were really great. Lightning Storm helped cleared some monsters in back row. I wouldn't make too many changes to this lineup, maybe add 2 or 3 Dark Holes and cut 1 or 2 talents. The next one we're looking at is 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. Cosmic Cyclone just goes so well into this format because of all the Fire King Snake Eye players, regular Snake Eye players, Labyrinth, Voiceless Voice. It hits so many cards. There's a lot of problem field spells, a lot of problem continuous or face-up traps and spells. Cosmic Cyclone just helps you out anti-spell, helps you out summon limit. It definitely came in clutch a few scenarios. Just be careful if you're going into game 3 with them. Some other notable side deck cards that you could play in Kashtira are 3 copies of Solemn Judgment or 3 copies of Solemn Strike to give you an extra negate, because the deck doesn't really have negates outside of if you want to make Baron de Fleur. Having that extra piece of insulation against the Nibiru, against anything really your opponent throws at you when it's their turn after you've already established your board, Old Man Says No is always a good effect. You just have to be careful because you're paying half your life points, obviously, but if you know that you have enough time or if you have enough resources to OTK them on the crackback, Solemn Judgment is just really good in being able to disrupt one problem card that maybe your Kashtira monsters or your spells and traps can't really get to, and you just need that extra little piece to put you over. Another card going really well with the Kashtira engine is Summon Limit. Because your big bodies are so big and you could special summon them and normal summon them with Birth, Summon Limit kind of helps you a lot, because under Summon Limit, Fenrir can already be a problem to deal with. Most of the time your opponent needs more than one summon to deal with Fenrir if they don't have a spell and trap out, or just your other Kashtira monsters in general if you've already established a full cash board. Summon Limit's just really good in the meta right now in general because of all the combo plays that are happening with Snake Eyes and some of the other decks. However, it's also really matchup dependent. There are decks that can play under Summon Limit well. I know at our locals, Labyrinth plays against it well, Voiceless Voice can play against it well, so it's a little bit matchup dependent, but it's sideable. Another board breaker we could go over is Dark Ruler No More. Because of the influx of Voiceless Voice and other combo heavy decks, Dark Ruler can help you set up your Kashtira board, deal with your opponent's board even though you're not doing any damage that turn, and then putting your opponent in a tough situation where they have to now deal with your Kashtira board after you've outed their board originally. And it being thrustable is always a plus. Some other extra deck monsters you could include is the Utopic Draco package. Because you're making a bunch of rank 7 exceed monsters, if you wanted an extra negate on the board, you could go into this line. However, you forfeit all of your other Kashtira bodies to do so. Personally, I kind of like having the Kashtira monsters on the board instead of having the Utopic Draco monsters on the board for the negate, because I feel like it's a lot harder to deal with multiple bodies with the spell and traps than it is to deal with the Utopic Draco monsters. Plus, we already have the capability of turboing out a Baron de Fleur anyway, so this is something that you could play if you wanted to, but I just prefer not to. And that rounds out the deck profile. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below for more deck profiles. I'm going to be trying to upload some deck profiles, combo videos, and maybe some Master Duel content as well. Appreciate you watching. This is Sirs TCG. Until next time.